Assalamu alaikum. My name is Fadwa Wazwaz, and I'm doing a presentation today on Mental Health Awareness Month. And this time I'm focusing on pain and suffering. I wanted to give a little context to where I'm getting or what discussion I had that brought about this particular presentation. And I do that because there's a misunderstanding between me and some people. I'm trying to get out of that irrational argument, if you will, and just bring it to an end. There was a discussion between me and somebody like early in 2000 regarding emotional blackmail and emotional abuse. And you had to deal with the fact that you're trying to convince this person to pray, like to make dua, supplication to God regarding their situation. And they felt that they kind of confused rida with fatalism. Whereas that no dua will not change my situation. I've accepted my destiny. This is some of their words. I'm just reading from the email. There's a path that it seems I'm taking, but destiny has it in place for me to take. God already knows my first day in life and last day in life and everything taking and how it will end. So they've confused acceptance or rida with fatalism, if you will, which is I bother trying. That I've tried, and so I'm not, but I think destiny is in place, and they've kind of like have this idea of fatalism where, they're just resigned to that. Some of the ways they'll say, why should I pray for guidance? If God wanted to guide me, he'd guide me, that kind of mentality where if it kind of comes into where you're guilting God. And so I had responded to that person, said, if you listen to yourself subconsciously, what you're really attempting to do is guilt God into changing your life. Instead of turning to God and accepting the situation, the trial and tribulation this individual was in. And, and I had talked to him about at that time, Hajar, the wife of Prophet Ibrahim, and her story and how she's an inspiration to us, how she kept making dua. And while making dua, she was going back and forth, there was action coupled with dua. It was not just supplication. And remember, Hajar is in a desert, and we're not all that situation where we're in a desert. I don't know what it's like to be like in a desert all by yourself. There must be one very strong woman with a child, and you're having to take care of yourself. And she's still having hope where she's going back, forth. She's trying to find aid for her child, like water or something to feed her child. But this individual, like I said, confused acceptance with fatalism. So I wanted to discuss today's presentation. I had started with the Hadith of Prophet Muhammad before Ramadan, because I was trying to transition into Mental Health Awareness Month. And the Hadith really goes, "O Allah, I am your slave, child of your slaves, of your male servant." Some say, son, but, if you're a daughter, you're going to say daughter, or you could just say child of your male servant, child of your female servant. My forelock is in your hand. And I think it's very kind of interesting to say that. I like this particular Hadith because it shuts certain doors but it also helps you because, if you think of life like water, it helps you to kind of walk over the bridge of life. But as you're walking over the bridge, it kind of puts that bridge over, like you might say, like a wave of or water, that's, that, because people like say jump in the sea. I believe there's like a saying by Rumi, I'm trying to like recall it, that if you're not a swimmer, don't jump in the sea. If you're not like a master swimmer or a captain, like don't jump in the sea. I can't recall what the particular saying by Rumi, but I recall it about, if don't jump in the sea if you're not like a master swimmer. And a lot of times people like think that they can just like go into like the sea, whereas, life, you don't know what's underneath in the sea. And you don't know how it's going to like rage or what, like if there's a shark in the sea, you don't know all of these things. What you really want is a bridge over the sea. You want to be able to walk over that bridge, because most of us aren't master swimmers. And even if you're a master swimmer, you could still end up drowning in the sea. You can get a cramp, you can get exhausted, you can have, serious problems. You may end up drowning. So a better kind of analogy for me that I like to say is a bridge. And it also reflects the fact that on the day of judgment, we will be asked to walk over a bridge, and if we learned how to walk over the bridge in life, we might be able to gain the light that we need internally to walk over the bridge in the day of judgment. So the very first thing is my forelock is in your hand, that there is a divine plan, and that I am a servant of God, that whatever I plot and plan with my forelock, because the execution, you might say, head, it's in the forelock. The forelock, the frontal part of the head, that's where the plotting and the execution takes place. So you could say that my forelock is in your hand. Your command for me prevails. This shuts the door for defiance and opposition, like, why did this happen to me? But it also shuts the door of shaitan, whereas if I did this, if I did that, if, Adam didn't do X, Y, Z, if, blah, 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 you just shut that door and say, your command for me prevails. And then you want to also shut the door of fatalism. Your judgment concerning me is just. And not just fatalism, but blaming God, questioning God, there's going to be like doors in the trial and tribulation that might cause you to fall over the bridge, either drown, or the bridge, you might end up destroying it with your own hands. You want to just shut all of these doors so that you can successfully walk over the bridge. So your judgment concerning me is just. You're not going to emotionally blackmail God, guilt God, question God. And at the same time, you don't want to like open the door of, if I didn't do this, because you just want to say, my forelock is in your hand. Your command for me prevails. Your judgment concerning me is just. You don't really think about it much, but if you really just take this hadith and just sit with it, and you say it to yourself, over and over again, you will find that over time, like one of the things, like when I used to go to biofeedback, like they would put these things like on your head, and they would monitor, like you would see the monitor on the screen. And by doing that, you can kind of see how certain thoughts that you have actually impact like the energy of your brain. So that's why I talk about like cognitive therapy. I think the way the dua, the Prophet says it, while I appreciate people making personal dua, I think there's a lot of wisdom in the Prophet's dua, the supplication, just the way they're said, how they're said. They close a lot of doors and they help us reframe cognitively, spiritually, emotionally, a particular situation. So during like Ramadan, the very end, I mentioned that there's pain and there's suffering. And pain is inevitable, like I mentioned in that email that I had with that individual. We will all face trials that will bring us emotional, mental, social, spiritual, and physical pain. Suffering is based on how we interpret the trial and tribulation we are going through. Suffering comes when we reject the trial and we go into denial. We might go from denial to questioning God. Why, God, you do this to me? Or if you don't do X, Y, Z, God, I'm not going to pray anymore. Or I am going to turn, like, in the case of Satan, and, seek refuge, protection from God, from going in that direction, where I'm going to turn your creation against you. Like you want to be vindictive and vengeful. So healing comes through surrendering to his love, mercy, and wisdom. And that surrender is not just say, I surrender. It's you have to tell yourself, my forelock is in your hand, that there's a divine plan. Whatever planning, it's under that umbrella of the divine plan. Now that's different. Again, there's acceptance of a trial and there's fatalism. I gave that email conversation as a context. So my forelock is in your hand. You're accepting a trial. You're not now being fatalistic. You're just accepting the trial, that whatever you plot and plan, it's under the umbrella of the divine plan. So God can allow it to bear fruit and God can say no. So it's always under the power of God. Your command for me prevails. Again, you're recognizing who's Lord here. Your judgment concerning me is just. And I thought this was a powerful statement by the Prophet. It's very beneficial when you're in pain and trial to say this particular hadith. Your judgment concerning me is just, instead of saying, why God, why God? And let's not be in denial that we are just, all saints, and we just, every time we had a trial and tribulation, we just like that. And, if I get kind of bothered when people pretend like they didn't struggle and they didn't maybe you didn't go to the point of Satan where you said, I'm going to do this or that, but that you didn't think, or the thought didn't come to your mind, or that you didn't it didn't pass through you. I think it's better to say that, when we go through trial and tribulation, this is the medicine for the trial and tribulation, is to really sit with yourself and say, your judgment concerning me is just. Just shut the door, and this is how you shut that door of the pain becoming suffering, or the suffering turning from acceptance into not just denial, but into fatalism, as I mentioned with this individual, or where you're starting to emotionally put all the blame of God. God wanted to guide me, he'd guide me. I've accepted my destiny. This is just how it is. Why should I make dua? Because you're obligated to make dua. It's a form of worship. You're not just making a dua to get something. You're making dua or supplication because it's an acceptance of who you are as a human being who needs to continue to keep that connection with God. So you're not making dua just to get something. You know, the relationship you have with God is not a give me, give me, give me. And I liked Abdul Latif Cross, who mentioned that, you know, he's not, God is not, so I like to quote him, a jackpot in the sky where you're just, dua is just like you're paying kind of at a casino, you're putting in your dua in a slot machine and just like, give me, you know, but it's a connection, it's communication. You have to keep that conversation going. And while doing it, I felt this hadith is helpful to read if you find yourself in a painful trial and tribulation. Is first build a bridge, you know, and, you know, again, that bridge is my forelock is in your hand, your command for me prevails, your judgment concerning me is just. You're like literally putting rails, if you will, around that bridge so that you don't fall off that bridge and end up going into raging water that might drown you or shove you who knows where with the waves. Going forth now, you want to walk across that bridge. You don't want to just get on that bridge and just stand there. You want to walk across the bridge. Now, if you're standing there, it's kind of like fatalism. You know, you've accepted, you say you've accepted the trial, but actually it's fatalism because you're just standing there. Acceptance of a trial is to walk across that bridge. You're trying to walk across the bridge. So you recognize that there is pain. You're not in denial of it, but you are interpreting it in a way that allows you to walk across that bridge. Now, at times you may fly, at times you may be able to run across that bridge, giving, you know, your circumstances and your faith and the resources you have, as I had mentioned earlier in a blog I used to write during the Star Tribune about trials and tribulations and the search for utopia. So the suffering is based on how we interpret the trial and tribulation that we are going through. Now, earlier before that, I mentioned a video by Sheikh Sharawi, who gave some of the wisdoms of trials and tribulations, and he focused on chapter 18 of the Quran, which is titled The Cave or Al-Kahf. These are stories in this chapter that help you interpret painful trials in life. But in fact, the entire Quran gives you beautiful stories that help you, if you will, to reframe and interpret the trial, which is painful and it's inevitable. But it helps that trial to not keep you just standing there on the bridge, but to walk or crawl if you need to, or limp if you need to. As I mentioned in some of my blogs, that there's a saying by Imam Shafi that, you know, come to God either, you know, walking or running, or even if you have to limp, but don't just stand there. So the suffering is really how you interpret the trial, and the way, the more, if you will, interpret it inaccurately, or the more at a mental level or emotional level you interpret it in a way that is unhealthy, the more that the trial will turn into more suffering and more suffering. And so, like, you could say that if you look at a sea, like the raging waves of the sea might be like the raging waves of your emotions or your feelings, and you will not be able to heal. Now, healing comes through surrendering to God, love, mercy, and wisdom. And those are like what the statements are saying. So if I was like on a biofeedback machine, because I used to have these workbooks about like anxiety, relaxation, mindfulness, and they would give you these affirmations that you would say. And at that time in my life, I used to say, okay, let me replace this affirmation with a dua. So I went through and I would find, a dua and I would replace that affirmation with a dua. I didn't like the affirmation so much, as I had mentioned in some of my blogs, because of the focus on the self. And I have another another video coming about the self. And this one will be looking at some of the commentary by Sheikh Sharawi. And I think he has a very wonderful one about that, regarding faith versus the self. That's not his words, but I'll have the video and then you can see it. I thought he did a very good job of that. But I just felt at that time, I don't know, something triggered me, and it was an incident where I was going through myself a very painful divorce. It was not very easy to deal with. And at the same time, there was a woman who had 4 daughters, and her husband, you could say, came from a traditional family, but her 4th child was a daughter, and he took it as why he's looking for a son. And so he decided there was nothing wrong with the woman, but he wanted a son. And so he did the egotistical 3 divorces on her, like you're divorced, you're divorced, you're divorced. And this woman, she's actually from India, and she's an Indian Muslim, not to say anything negative about India, but it could be like, situations that happens in Palestine, for example. But at that particular situation, she was from India, and he had divorced her. So this happened actually, I think, in India. It did not happen here. And he walked out on her, and so she was left looking at her life. Now she's divorced, and she has 4 daughters. The possibility of her getting married again is nil. So that's, again, that mentality of fatalism. I have 4 daughters, I have to take care of them. And the pain was obviously inevitable. And so she got very angry. One was she got that anger turned into suffering, but it became a point of suffering to such a degree that as she looked at her life journey, she saw that her life journey is going to be that she'll have to spend the rest of her life taking care of 4 girls and on her own. And she saw that as a fate worse than like death, if you will. And this is the time when I was listening to the story and just following all the discussion on it. And so she took it out on her daughters, not just on God, but on her daughters. And she killed all 4 girls. And it became like a big story during that time. And I remember that time very well. People then started to have a discussion about, well, blame it on Islamic law, blame it on the man, blame it on God. Why did I have 4 girls? So it transformed into fruitless conversations in every direction. I ran across this particular hadith. I remember I got really disturbed by what happened. And I got so disturbed that, it was like, how could you kill 4 girls and over a guy? Like, which man is worth to kill your children over? The heck with him, I thought, if this guy is going to throw 3 divorces and walk out, like, you should just throw him over the bridge and just say, get lost. So I mean, there are also other stories where the man will, in those traditional societies, and he'll leave the woman to take care of like the children as though she's a single, woman. He'll go to another country and like he'll soak his wild, oats, if you will. And then after like 10 or 15 years, he'll say, he became, he did tawbah and he came back, and the entire community will pressure the woman that, you have to take him back. Otherwise, you're not a good woman. And, there's that mental abuse where people are not nurtured to accept the consequences of their behavior, and where other people's behavior are oppression, somehow we have to interpret it in a way that we blame God or blame people who have nothing to do with it, like those 4 girls. So this particular hadith I found very, very helpful. Again, my forelock is in your hand because you want, when you're in that trial, you don't want to use your ego to really execute a decision as you're going across the bridge. My forelock is in your hand. So you're literally kind of asking God for help. It's a beautiful way of saying that unless you help me execute a plan, unless you help me, decide, I am going to end up making a decision that, remember when you're in pain, your emotions, your feelings, it's gonna overpower you. You might end up, like I said, either jumping over a bridge, committing suicide. You might end up, harming your kids. You might end up being pressured to accept harm. So there's all various ways that the pain, which is inevitable, can turn into suffering. And so suffering again comes from how we interpret the situation. So one is you want to tell God, my forelock is in your hand. I need your help to be able to walk, across that bridge. I need your help. I need your help to plan. I need your help to plot. I need your help to help me, You also want to say your command for me prevails. You're here now, you're nurturing within yourself acceptance of the trial, because you don't want to go into denial. Denial might push you into disassociation, where you try to disassociate completely from the trial, such that you create you put like a wall in your mind, and you start to fantasize that trial never ever happened, and you could never really heal from that suffering in that particular part of your experience. So your command for me prevails. You're nurturing your acceptance, but not fatalism. Your judgment concerning me is just. You want to prevent that, close the door of why you, or why does evil happen? Your judgment concerning me is just. And notice there is no why in this. But then to walk across the bridge, now you need to interpret the trial. And usually sometimes listening to stories, or reading a lot of, people, always stories help us kind of extract lessons or understanding that help us to walk across the bridge. I beseech you through every name you have, by which you have called yourself, or which you have sent down in your book, or which you have taught to any one of your creations, or which you have preferred to keep to yourself. among your guarded secrets, to make the great Quran the springtime of my heart. So again, here the heart is constricted. Now you're trying to water it with faith, if you will, and you're helping it to expand with the light, that comes from the Quran, the light that comes from remembering God. And then to take that pain, which is inevitable, and then to remove the sadness and the pacifier words. Now, I remember I went to a conference at that time. And, before, I came across this Hadith, and I started to understand like the importance of stories and how stories sometimes shape the way we see things. And they were having like a contest, and I was like, so like looking forward to winning, because they had these really cool gadgets, and they put them in the bag, and they called up my name that I won. I was kind of really happy, and my heart was set on winning this digital gadget. So I put my hand in the plastic bag, and I was just really looking forward to like a gadget, if you will, like something, they have, I forgot like where all those cool little things that they said you could win this, you could win that. There was some sort of digital player, and but what came up in my hand, I still have, in fact, that CD, was by Sheikh Husayri, and it was the Quran of chapter Yusuf, Prophet Joseph. And it was kind of like, I saw it at the time as my kind of the beginning, or my answer to this dua about make, the great Quran, the springtime of my heart, light of my chest, the remover of my sadness, and the pacifier of stories. So I opened it up, and I said, oh, and she's my friend who was there with me at the time. She's like, what did you win? And I said, oh, I got a CD of, Prophet Joseph's chapter in the Quran. So I took it, I'm not gonna lie and pretend that I was like really elated. I was actually looking forward to the digital, gift that they were talking about. But I ended up getting, that CD of Prophet Joseph. I put it, I remember, in the car, and I would just listen to it all the time. And I liked the beginning of the story of Prophet Joseph, and how it began about, this is the best of stories. And you know how sometimes, like when you hear a song, a particular tune comes into your mind, and it just keeps going, it just keeps like kind of playing itself over and over and over, and you can't get it out of your head. And so like sometimes, like when you listen to it, that part about this is the best of stories, this is the best of stories, and it's, actually this is the most beautiful of stories, it just kind of like stuck into your head and just kept replaying. And so I had written something about, and a story, there's a story we tell others, a story that lures the innocent, a story that hides our crime, a story of profit that enslaves another, a story of self-interest that seeks to benefit and take, a story that throws our sins onto the innocent, a story that hypes the crowd, a story that seeks protection from evil and falling into ignorance. And all of these stories are stories of projection. But there's another story, and it's the best of stories. It's not an invented story. It reached us through Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, a trustworthy receiver for a message of divine light, with a heart so pure cannot distort divine light. And he was not there. It was revealed to him by the best of storytellers to share with creation, the seekers of truth. It's a story of love, and from a Lord most loving And that began my journey of like reflections on the stories of love and projection from Joseph and Jacob. But it continued, like as you read, you went into slowly like into other parts of the Quran, and there you came across the prophet Moses story. And it was like, to God belongs the most beautiful names. Has the story of Moses reached you? And again, it would be like just those two verses, and it would just keep replaying in your mind over and over and over again, kind of like a tune that just doesn't go away. And so you started to like explore a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and then to get into the names, the importance of the names of God. And slowly you felt like kind of, how you're taking like somebody and you're pulling them slowly and slowly and slowly. And you start to see like the Quran is bringing you slowly in, slowly in, slowly in, as I mentioned, like in some of my blogs, layer by layer. It helps you to fix the lens which with you see the world. Like when you go to an eye doctor, like they'll put I don't know what you call it, but they'll put the way like to help you figure out the lenses. They'll say which is better, or which is, which one looks more clear, 3 or 4, and you have to choose one of the two. And this is kind of how I see like the Quran, layer by layer. It keeps correcting your lens, keeps correcting your lens, keeps correcting your lens, and helps you to like reframe and reframe and reframe the suffering and interpret it into a way that nurtures acceptance. Again, rida, not fatalism, but also not denial, because acceptance is between denial and fatalism. So it helps you to accept it. But in that acceptance, because what is like the fruits of acceptance is that you keep walking, or if you have to crawl, or if you have to limp, or running, or flying. But acceptance, there's you keep making dua, and you keep pushing yourself forward, walking across that bridge. And I felt the stories, as I had mentioned in that little like a poem that I kind of wrote about Prophet Joseph's story, were different than like stories, how when you're talking with people, there's a lot of drama and embellishment, and he said and she said, and if the cat jumped over the moon, no, it was the cow, and it was really the, you go back and forth, and after a while, as an introvert, you get like drained, and you feel like, oh, just get to the point, just get to the point, because you're just you're going on and on and on. I'm not even sure what you're talking about. The stories of the Quran are done in a way that they really have what I have found to be a light. Like they don't have this unnecessary drama or sensationalism or details that are just like, they have no value to it. It's like it brings you to a junction point, and it helps you differentiate, I see it as darkness, from darkness to light. It always shows you the light of faith. And then it shows you those who like their forelock, is or, like their nafs is running the show. And it tells you how they think and how they feel and how they engage and how they deal with the situation. It shows you those who have faith. And, story after story, story after story, they take you to another junction point, another trial, another situation. And it starts to strengthen you. But one of the beautiful things about the stories, I don't know how others felt, like, it's like some of these trials and tribulations are difficult that we face in life. We can't like belittle how difficult they are. But I feel like at times, though, we give a negative message to people. We're not honest with how the stories of the prophet were. And in doing so, we sometimes nurture envy. We nurture jealousy under the name of God, by the way, in the name of faith. We nurture defiance. We nurture oppositional disorders. We nurture unhealthy ways to deal with the trial. For example, in the story of Prophet Moses, I remember that, I don't know, like I'm not somebody who cries easily or cries a lot, but I felt like when I reached the end of the story, it was a very like emotional moment for me because he never got to the promised land. I remember when I read in the story where his brother, who is now Harun, passed away. He had to bury him. And that was like his most, you know how you have your most intimate companion, kind of like Khadija was to Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessing. And when she passed away, he went through a moment of Prophet Muhammad sadness. You know, it was called the year of sadness because you have somebody here, and how many of us can say you have somebody who's like your back, you know, and it's not, you know, an egotistical tribal person hyping you up for self-interest, but somebody who's, you know, of integrity, honesty, standing by you with faith, helping you on your mission, you know, and that's what Harun was to Prophet Moses. And so, you know, he passed away. And he had to like bury him before they reached the promised land, and that Moses himself never reached the promised land. And so some of us, like when we are dealing with trials and tribulations, we communicate to people that the trial and tribulation that we face, that we will find, if you will, a silver lining, or I don't want to use the word silver lining because somebody might interpret it against him. You might find like a positive result according to what you think is positive in your lifetime. And when you read the prophet stories, what you find is that they were ridiculed, they were oppressed, not one time, but it was a series, like in the story of Prophet Joseph, many times oppressed, oppressed by, his family, oppressed by the people who sold him into slavery, oppressed, in the kingdom. Then he was imprisoned. The woman in the kingdom first, were talking about the prime minister's wife, then they were talking about him. So it was like a multitude of oppressions. Now, many of us, after one painful trial, will have a hard time recovering. But imagine like trial after trial after trial. And I has mentioned, like also in another post on Facebook, that as you're reading, like again, the Quran, it wakes you up, it grounds you into reality. You're not like, going anywhere. It keeps bringing you down. It keeps bringing you down, not in the sense of burying you, but grounding you with reality. That these are the prophets, and they reached a point, like it says even in the story of Prophet Joseph. I mentioned that on my post. Let me just find that post. Give me 1 minute. So I just want to make sure I read and have it memorized. So I want to make sure I read it exactly accurately. So give me 1 second here. So it says in Prophet Joseph's story, say, this is my way, I do and invite unto Allah on evidence as clear as seeing with one's eyes, I and whoever follows me. Glory to Allah. Never will I join God with Allah. And listen to this. Nor did we send before thee as messengers any but men, whom we did inspire, and living in human habitations. Do they not travel through the earth and see what was the end of those before them? But the home of the hereafter is best. For those who do right, will you not then understand? Respite will be granted until when the messengers give up hope of their people, not hope from God, but hope of their people. So the messengers never lost hope with God. Come to think that they were treated as liars. There reaches them our help, and those whom we will are delivered into safety, but never will be warded off of our punishment from those who are in sin. And so when you read, when you read the Quran, it tells you a different type of storytelling, that the prophets had enemies, that they had people who not just insulted them, but they like hyped up society, that they were pushed to the position of, like Prophet Muhammad and Ta'if, where they were treated as liars, like, when Moses went before the Pharaoh, he went alone. So they were pushed and they were facing difficult trials and tribulations. It was not like, these are godly men, because sometimes, people need to wake up to this interpretation that they have, where they were godly men, everybody loved them and everybody cared about them and everybody was hyping them up. There are, when you read some of the stories, and like the story of Prophet Abraham, he was exiled, he was kicked out from, from his community. And when you read the stories, they're more like, they ground you, and they bring you into the face reality. So like, let's just say if you're reading the story, and to get back to the initial stories that I mentioned, and you're facing a tribulation, your husband did like 3 divorces and walked out. Now you're looking ahead of you, and you have 4 girls to take care of. You're in the possibility of you getting married again is 0. And you read the prophet stories and you realize some of them were assassinated, some of them were, killed. And you read about, these are the people who are close to God. These are the ones who are pious. If you read like the Habib al-Najjar in chapter 36, where he came running in the defense of the prophets and he was killed. And you read, story after story. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be killed or attacked, but you start to understand, and it removes the understanding of why did God do this and why did God do that. It starts to fix your lens with how you interpret the pain and the situation. You might, instead of saying, because of these girls, that this had happened to me, and then take it out all on them and end up killing them, you might, say, God knew that this person was, reflected on, some of these stories, was just not a good person. He was emotionally abusive, asking me to control something that's not within my power. And God removed him from my life. And I have a journey to take with, raising these 4 girls and helping them to be, good, like women of faith. You might find inspiration from Hajar, who was in the desert, or Mary, the mother of Jesus, who was also a single. I had both of about being independent in the book God Intervenes Between a Person and Their Heart, because sometimes your trial or your tribulation or the pain that you face puts you in a situation where that there is the possibility, yes, nothing's impossible with God, that you'll find somebody. But it might be like, let's just say you had your leg amputated. It might be that you have to nurture acceptance. And the reality may be that finding somebody who's going to be healthy enough to help you while you have 4 children is going to be really very difficult. And it might not even happen. And so you might just be thinking about how to take care of these girls, maybe going on a different type of life journey than others to cross that bridge, but to keep the end in mind, which is the home of the hereafter is best. And I think the stories of the Quran really help you in interpreting by telling the stories of faith accurately, emotionally accurately, mentally accurately, and they do it in a way that is very, very healthy. So I encourage people there is no better book when you're going through a painful trial to read than the Quran. I don't think my book is going to be as helpful as just reflecting on it, because at best, as I mentioned in that post, we can conjecture what someone is going through. I don't know what's inside of you, but the Quran is very good at, for every individual, universally, it's not for a time or for a place. It can help every person. That's how I see it. Help them to layer by layer internally, to fix the lens with which they see the trial that they're in or the pain that they are feeling, and help them to walk across the bridge. I hope, that this was beneficial. And I had shared in that post 2 examples of where individuals also they shared this very same hadith. So it wasn't just me, but they used this supplication and they found comfort in creating a relationship with the Quran. So I and early on, like I said, I ran across this hadith, and it really pushed me in the direction of the Quran. And I started that journey of just taking slowly, little reflections here, little reflections there. But I really found that the stories of the Quran really help to fix the lens of your perception of the trial. And you can throw it to somebody in their face, but it's not something you can put in someone's heart unless the person turns to God. And by turning, I mean they're opening their heart, and then as the hadith says, my forelock is in your hand. You're accepting. You're turning to God to help you in your planning, in your plotting, and you're accepting his command, the divine decree. So you're nurturing also in yourself acceptance. Instead of saying why, you're saying your judgment concerning me is just, but you're also wanting to walk across that bridge. You don't want to nurture fatalism and just stand there and say that you've accepted the trial. You want to start moving forward. And I think by, fixing your framing or your interpretation of the trial can really help you to prevent the trauma from turning into suffering in your heart, in your mind. So when I was on biofeedback, like I said, I would find particularly the supplications of Prophet Muhammad and just change those affirmations to those supplications. And I would, watch it on the machine. I would see an improvement in the biofeedback machine. You could kind of see it. So I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for others. But I really feel the supplications are set in a way that if we reflect on it as we're saying it, and you can't force someone to say it because they're not opening their heart to it. The person has to, out of their own will, like they say, you can bring a horse to the water, but you can't force him to drink. The person has to themselves be open to turning to God, saying, my forelock is in your hand, turning to the water, reflecting the faith, the light that's going to come from the Quran, and allow themselves to receive that light of the Quran, and it will slowly then remove their sadness and help them deal with their worries. I listen to stories of people. Again, this is not judging anybody's story or anybody's perception. Like I said, our view we're human beings, so our view and our perception of reality is at best conjecture, and that's why by turning to the Quran, it keeps fixing. Even till now, you can't claim, like, I say for myself, I can't claim like I see things that exactly the way they should be according to our faith. But I know that I should keep turning to God, like I said in this dua, asking God to help fix the lens and fix the lens and fix the lens. And that, or I believe that, I shouldn't say I believe that in doing so, that your heart will keep expanding with the light of the Quran, expanding with the light of the Quran, and your ability to see things will become, again, the precision of the lens will be continually perfected and perfected so that you could see with like a stronger faith, and given the light that you are receiving in your heart. I hope this was beneficial again, and I pray that if it is beneficial for you, that you share it with others. And I thank you very much for listening in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.